Welcome back to the podcast. This is a series of podcasts on Jack Kirby from a trade of a collection of Jack Kirby essays that Jim Beard put out earlier this year. And I have Bobby Nash and Joe Crowe.
I'm a writer. I write novels, comic books, audiobooks, screenplay. I'll write anything pretty much. I'm a longtime comic fan. Got into comics as a kid. Oddly enough, my very first Jack Kirby book wasn't the ones you would usually expect. The first time I ever saw any Jack Kirby art was a Inhumans comic with the giant hand like destroying the city. How could I not buy that book? And then I later learned that I knew Jack Kirby's art from the cartoons, the Fantastic Four and Thundar, and I didn't realize that at the time the same guy. But yeah.
Joe, tell us about you.
Yeah, I a little bit in the same boat as Bobby. My first Jack. Oh, here's who I am. I am a writer, a copy editor, and a pro wrestling announcer around the southeast of the United States. And I appear at conventions. I'm a track director at Dragon Con in Atlanta. But really, if there's an opportunity to hear myself talk, I'm all in. Bobby, you can confirm.
I will say too, Joe and his cohort Gary Mitchell do these wonderful read-alongs where we do podcasts like this where we react out classic TV show episodes.
Oh yeah.
So if it's worth your time to go on YouTube and look up the American Sci-Fi Classics Turkey Drop episode.
We did a reading
yes.
of the WKRP in Cincinnati episode. We've done the Charlie Brown Christmas special. And in live action at Dragon Con this year, we're doing Saturday Night Live sketches.
Nice.
For the 50th anniversary. But back to Jack Kirby, I didn't like him at first. I was accustomed to seeing The Thing. One of my first Marvel comics was Marvel 2-in-1. And so the artist in there might have been George Perez, who obviously very different from Kirby. And then when my uncle Jeff, who got me interested in all of this stuff, when he showed me the original FF comics with Kirby art, I was like, I don't like this. Now, I learned to like it. It turns out I was wrong. Kirby is tremendous, but that's how it started for me.
So, how did you guys each get involved in the book, and how did you get about being able to pick or choose what topics you guys were involved with? Bobby, why don't you go first?
This is a really simple one. Jim just said, "Hey, do you want to write a thing for this Jack Kirby book I'm doing? Are you a Kirby fan?" And I said, "Sure, I'd love to." Then it was like he asked us to pitch. I think we pitched 3 because he had to, what are the 3 you're interested in? So I pitched 3. Then Jim comes to me and goes, "We're going to ignore those. What I would like you to write is this thing about the Inhumans." And I'm like, okay. Thank God I had those issues. So I just went and dug them out, reread them, and was able to write about it. But yeah, it was really Jim going, I need somebody to write about the Inhumans.
What about you, Joe?
The same. I've been Jim, a guest of mine at Dragon Con. I've been on podcasts with him multiple times. I've written for him before in some of his other books, but when this came up, like Bobby said, I pitched 3, and I pitched the one that I ended up writing, Not Brand Echh, thinking somebody clearly is going to want that ahead of me. And nobody did. And Jim for sure wanted a Not Brand Echh chapter. So my other options, I think, were, or the ones that I chose, Devil Dinosaur, and maybe I picked Forever People. But Not Brand Echh is what I got, and I dig it.
Yeah, it seems so perfect for you, though, with your writing style.
We're going to talk about Amazing Adventures. Bobby, you're talking about Amazing Adventures, which is Marvel's attempt to revive that dual hero titles in the Silver Age, like Strange Tales and Tales to Astonish. Came out in 1970, and Kirby did the first 3 issues with the Inhumans.
That was an interesting take because that was the first time that Jack was credited as writer and artist. Those were the first that he is listed as doing both of those jobs. And Kirby is a fantastic storyteller. Kirby's strength is in the way he lays out panels. There's a lot of power. There's a lot of movement. His early scripting, it's a work in progress. You can also see that he's mimicking a lot of what Stan Lee did when they worked together in his writing, and by that, a lot of times the dialogue says exactly what they're doing, but the storytelling itself is fantastic. It is very action packed. There's a lot of power. The Inhumans are all supremely strong characters. And it's 4 issues that he worked on. Each issue had 10 pages for his story. So basically, he wrote 2 full issues that they cut in half. And he only did the first 4. So I don't know why he didn't go beyond that. Because after he left, Roy Thomas and Neil Adams took over. The Inhumans came out of the Fantastic Four, features prominently in this story. Maximus has fired rockets at the Inhumans' home and has blamed the Fantastic Four for it, so the Inhumans will go kill the Fantastic Four. It's a Marvel trope. Heroes fight, come together, solve their problem. The second story was the one that I found a little more interesting because it had them going up against someone who I would not think of as a good Inhumans foe. They're fighting the Mandarin, the old Iron Man villain, which also very weirdly, they kill the Mandarin at the end of the issue. Which,
What?
Yeah, the Mandarin is dead at the end of the book. Although there is an out, the Mandarin does have robots, duplicates like Doctor Doom does. So there's wiggle room, which apparently because the Mandarin kept showing up in Iron Man. But those 4, they showcase a lot of Kirby's strengths in storytelling. There's a lot of big ideas, a lot of big action. There's monsters and underground cities and ancient this and that, and all just done in this way that Kirby draws that is so uniquely Kirby. No matter who's inking Kirby, when you see a Kirby drawing, you generally know it's a Kirby drawing. Those 4 issues, they're a lot of fun to read. The individual issues themselves are fairly expensive, I think, if you try to find them, but they are part of an Inhumans trade that reprints the Inhumans FF stories and that. So you can find it in trade format.
They're also on the Marvel Unlimited app.
So if you're a Kirby fan and you've never read these, they're a nice addition to the stories that they did in the Fantastic Four.
Do you think this sort of does a road test for him leaving to go to DC and working out some of the bumps along the way?
I could see that. This was the first time he was given reign to actually script. Because if you've seen, there are several magazines that have over the years published Kirby's pages where he was writing all that stuff in the margins anyway. Because the Marvel style, for those who don't know, real quick, the writer generally didn't write a script. They would write a plot, and the artist would then go and take the plot and figure out the storytelling. So Jack would write all these notes. Here's what's happening. So Stan Lee would know what was going on to write the script. And now when he's scripting it himself, obviously, he's the guy making those decisions. But Kirby would do that anyways. He was still doing a fair amount of plotting and writing. Someone else was just scripting it. So yeah, this was probably a good test run because he goes over to DC and writes and draws several titles. And then he comes back and writes and draws Captain America and 2001, Devil Dinosaur, all those. So yeah, this was kind of where that started, where giving Jack some free reign. I imagine, as a writer, it's writing with Jack is different than writing with other people because Jack has such big ideas and the way he lays pages out. As a writer, I don't think every writer could work with Kirby to get as good a product, a finished story. So I think at some point, Jack really was the best writer to work with him. And then seeing how he could do it. Could he do it? He's learning a lot from having worked with Stan Lee on the FF. He is very dialogue heavy, very caption heavy. So there's a lot of that you can feel Stan's influence. And Stan Lee is listed as editor, so he may have actually tweaked some of that too. But it's a good reminder of just Jack's storytelling, these big ideas that he has, and the big action and the big power that goes into those stories. If you're a Kirby fan or an Inhuman fan, I think you would enjoy them. They're not deep stories, they're simple stories. You can read it in one sitting, and it's like a nice bite-sized little morsel of good comics.
This must have been an interesting time for Kirby, because over here he was writing that in Amazing Adventures. And then over in Not Brand, which Joe's going to talk about in a minute, Kirby actually was able to do some humor stuff, because Not Brand was their humor title. It ran for 13 issues, from about 67 to 69, where they poked fun at everybody: Marvel, DC, Gold Key, and everybody from Marvel contributed to it. But it seems to me that Kirby, correct me if I'm wrong, Joe, but Kirby seemed to have a lot of really cool stuff in the parody comic.
Yeah, and like you said, it started in 67, and so that's not long after the whole shebang began in 61. And so everything is real fresh. But Kirby, now, he drew most of his contributions to Not Brand Echh, but the ones that he wrote are just hilarious because he was there. He dug into those characters more so than anybody who was just coming on to them for the second time or the third time. He was there when they created Dr. Doom, so he knows what makes Doom funny. And there it is on the page in Not Brand Echh.
Humorous stuff very often, did he?
Now, Grant, like the best writers and creators, that was not Kirby's main deal. There's stuff that's funny and laugh worthy in Kirby's things, like Forever People. I remember, was it Forever People when they come into their house and there's Darkseid on the couch?
On the couch, yep.
Yeah.
With the Thing in the Fantastic Four, there was a lot of funny bits with the Thing.
And so there's the prospect is there, but that wasn't. I think Kirby, and no, he did not seek out comedic stuff.
Do you think he really enjoyed doing this type of stuff, and that it showed up differently in his artwork?
I think so, because now Kirby is well known for intricate details in his backgrounds and giant bombastic stuff in the background of his panels. But in Not Brand Echh, you got to look at every panel because there's sight gags in the thing. There are sight gags everywhere. And it's from little scenes happening in the background.
So they had some really cool alliterations, like the Silver Surfer was a Silver Burper, Thor was Sore, you had the Fantastical Four, the Human Scorch. What were some of your favorites that Kirby did in that run?
None of, and I wrote about this.
Guest.
No, I recognized what they were doing, but nobody, how much, okay. I struggled with this when I was writing my chapter. It's not that hard, I would think, or maybe it's super hard to come up with a parody name for something, but Kirby was too busy. He had drawing to do, and the art was tremendous. And it feels, knowing what I've read, or just knowing Stan Lee's style, the names seem like something Stan said, and Kirby's okay, fine. But now the Mighty Snore, I think, is gonna be my favorite because when you first meet him, he's sleeping, like being pulled by a Mjolnir, and he's out cold. It's tremendous.
So how does the Not Brand Echh stuff hold up in the body of Kirby work?
It is really different. You don't expect Kirby to have done this kind of thing, but it holds up because it's the time period that it came out in. It's fresh. He's only a few years into the beginning of the Marvel Universe. I'm not going to say he's in his prime. And the fact that he took a few minutes and did a few of these, I feel like he was there to launch the thing. Most of his stuff is in the first couple issues. Then he just turned the rest of the bullpen loose on the rest of the book.
I think Amazing Adventures was the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, then you can bring in other people.
Yeah. But Kirby started it off with, like, most of it is similar to, I think it was Harvey Kurtzman who did Super Duper Man in like the first issue of Mad Magazine. It's a lot of Not Brand Echh is just like that. That's their inspiration, and that's good.
I have a question though for both of you. Is it common that most people don't like Kirby at first and then evolve over to this thing of, oh my gosh, I see why he's the king of comics?
I think it depends on when you're introduced to Kirby.
What about you, Joe?
My first introduction to Kirby, he was already in that drawing blocky phase. Square, very square, blocky characters. And it took me a minute because I was used to guys like Keith Pollard and George Perez and John Byrne, and they're not drawing like that. But then I go back later and look at those early FF issues. It's almost like a different guy. The Kirby on Thor, the Kirby on Captain America, and the Kirby on the Fourth World stuff at DC, to me, it all seems like a different guy because each of those is uniquely their own thing. Like he drew Thor a little different than he drew Captain America books. There was, depending on what he was working on, he could alter his style. And then, of course, we get to the 70s and he starts working in animation. His style gets a little simpler because he's learned how to draw things for animation. You still get that feeling of the power and the layout and how he put stories and characters together, but they were much simpler in design.
Go on, Bobby.
I think a lot of his humor translated into those shows. I know he wasn't writing them, but I know he was part of, let's face it, you do the FF, Herbie is funny. Herbie and the Thing going at it. There was humor in that. And I think that's where Kirby's humor ended up going, more to those type of things. So it depends on when you discovered Kirby, because there was a point where Kirby, there was a little backlash, fandom backlash against Kirby because his style changed. Like when he goes over and did superpowers over at DC, it's not the kind of Jack we were getting when he was at Marvel. And so there were a lot of people that kind of turned on him for a bit. Actually, I hate to repeat it, but there was a phrase I've heard many times called, he went through the Jack the Hack period. And then later he comes back and he gets that moment where the fans turn on him. And then later the fans embrace him again. And that's more, I think, about the fans than it is about Jack, because he was still producing the work. He was still working hard. He was still putting out a lot of books over the years. So yeah, he has quite the tremendous body of work. I think some people, like I said, at first when I saw his art, I was like, this guy's kind of blocky. First time I saw Captain America, I'm like, that's not Captain America. So it took me a minute to fall in love with what he was doing.
Joe, going back to Kirby being sometimes an acquired taste. So how does a new fan just getting into comic books approach Kirby, Joe?
I think that y'all are both very right about him being, at first, an acquired taste, but I wonder, it depends on what other stuff you were reading at the time when Marvel began in this time period. It's really him and Steve Ditko, very different. You had the one thing and the other thing, and that's all you got. I feel like you got to know what you're coming in for, because maybe you recognize, say, Spider-Man, everybody's going to be thin and lanky and they're going to twist in weird proportions. But Kirby, every character looks like a cab driver and they're going to punch you in the face. Once I realized that, I was like, oh, that's what he's doing.
People have never heard of or read of Jack Kirby. I think now, because so many people talk him up, there could be this thing you're expecting, because those of us in this book were really talking him up. And you may then open one of his books and go, I don't get sometimes the time frame. When you talk about your favorite James Bond, it's usually the one you found first. Your favorite Doctor Who you found first, that kind of thing. And I think comics are like that as well. It depends on when you discovered Jack Kirby, and that makes a difference.
Joe, I'm going to let you get the final thoughts in. You sum it up on anything you want to say about Jack Kirby.
He doesn't get enough credit. And I know Bobby and I and a zillion other people just wrote a big book about it. I think there's more to be said about Kirby. You could do a movie about the dude. It's just a foundational building block of comics is Kirby stuff. If you are a fan of anything, you want to go back to the basics and see all of it. Kirby's right there. And his work defined decades of comics. And yeah, so there you go. That's how I'm going to end it.
Bobby Nash, Joe Crowe, talking about Jack of all trades, the trade paperback published this year. Thank you both.
My pleasure.